Welcome everyone to the Roast for and Everything. We are on episode 238, joined today by Fenian and Nolsey.
Hello.
Weather's a lot nicer now. It's like only 24 degrees as we speak.
Yeah, I'm not coming home and just immediately punching my fucking air conditioner on.
It's nice. Yeah, not having to pay those enormous power bills that we're all forced to pay nowadays. Anyway, guys, we got a fair bit to cover today, as usual, and as usual, we're going to start off with a bit of a discussion on the rise of anti-Semitism in this country. So, those of you who are Sky News viewers, or maybe just kind of periodically check out their YouTube channel like I do, you would have known that last week they actually held a summit on anti-Semitism, because of course that is the thing that Australia needs right now. So this was hosted, as I said, by Sky News, and the main host of it was Shari Markson. Who else would they get? And there was a fair number of high-profile figures there. Peter Dutton was there. Albo was not, and that was commented on, of course. Chris Minns, New South Wales Premier, was there. Josh Frydenberg, the former Treasurer. John Howard, as well, former Prime Minister, who is arguably our most Zionist Prime Minister ever. Although, give Peter Dutton a chance if he is elected.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is like a hot dog eating event, but instead of Franks, it's Jewish cock.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, as you can imagine, it was an absolute cringe fest of philo-Semitism, and going on and on about how it is not just the struggle of Jews and Israelis, it's the struggle of everyone. Josh Frydenberg, in particular, I think, tried to hammer that point home in his speech. And, we've commented on this before that, apparently if Jews suffer, the entire Western world suffers in a very, very egregious way.
I've still yet to hear someone actually substantiate that. Why less than, either a fraction of a percentage, or in the case of America, literally the most Jewish nation outside of Israel, a little shy of 2% of the population really matters all that much.
Yeah, well, look, the closest I've ever heard to substantiating that claim is something I heard Douglas Murray say about a month ago. And Douglas Murray is definitely not the first person to say this. But he says that there are two main pillars of Western society. One is Greece, and then the other is Jerusalem. Because he's talking about Christianity, or as he would prefer to call it, Judeo-Christian values. Because, of course, you can't talk about Christianity without talking about the Jewish roots. So he argues that, if you were to then target Jews or Judaism as a movement, you're actually knocking down one of those key pillars of the West. And for some reason then, Westerners would suffer greatly for it, He never really ties that up into a modern context.
Can I just conject that, the first, say, Jewish holiday that is, meant to be a representation of their life outside of the, the Levant, is them celebrating genociding Greek people.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, not just that, several holidays in Judaism are basically about slaughtering non-Jews.
I'm yet to find one that isn't. Passover is, Purim is, Hanukkah is, celebrating the Maccabi revolt. So that one is too. Which one isn't is probably the better question.
God knows, man. I don't know. But anyway, that's what we're always told, and this, because inevitably some people do ask, what do we have to care about anti-Semitism? And especially, in Australia, I believe we have just over 100,000 Jews. It's obviously much more in countries like the US, like you said, but as a percentage, it's still small. In America, it's 2%, I believe. It's about as big as...
America has like 4 times the amount of Jews proportionally to Australia. Over here, it's about 0.5% of the population. America is about 2% of the population.
Right. So it's about as big as our Aboriginal population, roughly. Yeah. But yeah, look, the one story, though, that I did put in my prep from this conference, because I guess this was perhaps the most newsworthy one, was that there were Labor figures there. As I said, Chris Minns was there, and he actually got some standing ovations. Now, of course, the Jews tend to like Chris Minns, even though they, tend to favour the coalition over Labor, or at least certainly in the current context, they certainly do. But Chris Minns, and we'll get into this, of course, is looking to pass hate speech legislation that goes even further than what the federal laws do, because he wasted no time in pandering to the Jewish lobby when those protests broke out on October the 8th of 2023. However, there was a Labor figure that was not exactly greeted kindly, and that was the Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, who I might remind everyone is the primary figure responsible for the new hate speech laws that we have at the federal level, meaning that you can actually be targeted by the Australian Federal Police in any jurisdiction in this country for doing things like a Roman salute or displaying a swastika.
Or as we've recently found out, showing up to a shrine.
Right. But look, that is all not good enough for the people who attended this summit. He started talking about how we need to sideline weaponizing anti-Semitism. So he mentioned media giants, and I'm pretty sure he meant Sky News and the Murdoch press generally here. He singled them out, and of course the coalition, for weaponizing anti-Semitism and using it for scoring cheap political points. Now, I'd agree with Mark Dreyfus here, but I'd say, by the same token, Chris Minns has done that as well. And I mean, both parties have been competing with each other in terms of who can pass legislation that is most pleasing to the Jewish lobby. We've got another example of that today. I know I've mentioned this before, but for example, Roman salutes were not supposed to be in the Commonwealth legislation.
No.
Mark originally said that, that's a policing matter, therefore it should be left up to the states. And you know what? I agree. It's still ridiculous that the states should have laws like that, but anyway. But right after that, Peter Dutton said, no, that's not good enough. The Commonwealth should encompass those kind of laws as well. The day after Peter Dutton said that, Mark Dreyfus announced a revision to the bill and said, okay, well, we will do that actually, because we've been called out as not pandering enough to the Jewish lobby, therefore we need to do more. We can't let Peter Dutton win this. So really the only thing he said, well, I'll just read out the direct quote. It said, anti-Semitism cannot and must not be weaponized in the pursuit of votes. It must not be weaponized in the pursuit of newspaper sales or TV ratings. We all must take a stand together. It is a matter of deep regret to me that not all of us have found themselves able to resist the temptation to sow division, to weaponize anti-Semitism, to exploit the harm it causes. So all those comments I read just then, these were met by jeers. Some people actually stood up and turned around. Some people actually just walked out altogether.
Good. At least the viewing public there had the appropriate reaction, I guess.
Yeah, and also, I'm sure the bulk of our listeners would know this, but Mark Dreyfus is a Jew, okay? Not only has he passed legislation, absolutely pandering to the rabid Jewish mob, he has his own personal motivations here because he is Jewish. But yeah.
What dog do you have in this fight?
And yeah, look, as I said, he has passed draconian, authoritarian, yes, anti-democratic legislation that is trampling on people's civil liberties because the Jews told him to, and because he wants to. But all of that is still not good enough for the, the more rabid elements, which is pretty much all of them, of the Jewish lobby. And the Jewish lobby in Australia, we've also mentioned, is very hawkish. They all tend to side with the conservative side of politics. They're very militant in terms of both US and Israeli policy, foreign policy, that is. And we really only have like one progressive Jewish lobby group in Australia. I forget what they're called now. We covered them at the time, and they emerged as a direct result of the hawkishness of the Australian Jewish lobby. They're like, oh no, there's too many
Australian Jewish Council.
wings.
The Australian Jewish Council. That was the one we covered recently, trying to
Australian Jewish Council.
Yeah, I was like, hey, calm the fuck down.
That's their basic message. Yeah, it's like, well, guys, you're going a bit too far here. You're all sounding like Itamar Ben-Gvir. The real, like, the ones like not in Likud, but in the parties to the right of Likud, who joined Netanyahu in coalition. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what they sound like. Even, so-called progressive voices like Mark Liebler. Right, Mark Liebler, the main architect of the Aboriginal voice to Parliament. That ultimately failed, of course. But if you look at the kind of things that he has to say now about anti-Semitism in Australia, you'd think he's running for the Likud party.
Oh God, his rhetoric is boiling down to obliterate this goyim now. I'm gonna go pull up his Twitter and see if I've got any fucking bangers.
Now, look, I mean, this summit comes like we're probably looking. The next election, I think, will be in the next 6 to 8 weeks, thereabouts. Most people are saying it'll be sometime in April because March is too close to the WA election, and May is like the deadline, and we all know that Albo probably wants to go to the polls a little earlier because the general trend is negative for Labor in terms of how they're polling. So they want to get in quick. But it's just amazing, like, where's the cost of living summit? Where's a summit on immigration or housing or homelessness? Something like that. No, the summit that is of paramount importance apparently is on anti-Semitism and can also attract some of the biggest political names across the country. It blows me away, Tell me again how this tiny, tiny minority in this country, as Knowlesy said, about 0.5%, managed to wield so much power as to get national summits of that much importance going. It's really quite spectacular. Now, let's go to the hate speech laws in the Northern Territory. They have not passed yet. So the bill was introduced to Parliament last Tuesday. And just to give you a little bit of the details of it, you could be jailed for a maximum of 2 years and fined up to $11,000 for vilification, whether that be anti-Semitism or homophobia or whatever it might be. But obviously, it's a response to anti-Semitism. So this would actually make additions to criminal law in New South Wales. So, something like Section 18C is part of the Racial Discrimination Act. It's not exactly something that the police can go and arrest you for. It's something you've got to bring to court. Jewish groups do not like that. And, many other groups don't like it either. Like, this is stuff the Greens are absolutely in support for. Even though, the Greens historically have been against mandatory minimum sentences, they were fine for that when it came to these new hate speech laws. There, I'm talking about at the Commonwealth level, of course. But the Liberals and the Greens in New South Wales, they want amendments to the current bill. And this has led all of them to kind of point the finger at the other to say, no, we're the ones doing a better job at policing the Jews, not you. So the upper house in New South Wales on Friday, they amended the government's new bill that gives the offences a 3-year use-by date. Now, what that means is there's a sunset clause. That means that in 3 years' time after these laws reach royal assent, they would actually have to re-legislate them. They'll be gone. Like, it's these laws will self-destruct automatically in 3 years provision, basically, that they put in there.
Is that because they know exactly how hyper-catastrophic it is, and it's really just to placate certain groups of people for now?
Yeah, I mean, I had this discussion with a friend a week or two ago, and we were talking about how a lot of these laws may well be unconstitutional because it violates the right of political communication. Remember, the High Court of Australia has said Australians have a right to political communication. And he said to me, well, look, there's a very good chance that either the laws will be defeated in the High Court or they will be repealed because they know that they wouldn't survive a High Court challenge. And he said, but by then, we would have gone well past the next election. We would have gone well past, the treaty or the truce that's been called between Hamas and Israel. So in other words, the short-term effect that they were intended to have would have already been realized. So, yeah, maybe putting in that 3-year sunset clause is also just a recognition that, like, these are temporary measures. They're still, completely draconian and undemocratic and a violation of Australian civil liberties. However, there does seem to be this understanding that, like, they're not going to be around forever. Or at least they'll be challenged. And yeah, that's basically my view.
I think there's a group of ethnic lobbyists right now who, and I would tend to concur with them, believe that this is just a momentary uptick in anti-Semitism, and that
you only need a temporary response to it.
Yeah, and that's when Israel has finished consolidating their current operations and etc., and obviously they've physically shipped out the remaining Gazans everywhere, and given a couple months to cool down, that everything will be just fucking fine. Which, yeah, that probably will be the case, unfortunately.
Right. Okay, now, all right, so the Liberal Party wanted to put in amendments. Now, this would have actually had tougher sentencing for the use of Nazi symbols, especially when used to target a synagogue, and also tougher offences for protesters who target places of worship. And again, you're just talking about a synagogue there.
Yep.
So Labor basically said you're abandoning the Jewish community for, like, opposing the bill on that measure. And they're like, no. We like the bill, but we just want you to go further. So there it is. Like I said, this is the battle between the two parties. It's like, which one can actually go further in pleasing the Jews?
Christ almighty.
Oh, wait, that's right. Something else that the Liberals are pushing for in New South Wales as an amendment to this bill is an 18-month standard non-parole period in jail for anti-Semitic offenders. So that means you would have an absolute minimum of a year and a half in jail if you were found to have committed an anti-Semitic offence under these laws.
Oh boy.
Which is they don't have a criminal code in New South Wales, but under criminal law now, these vilification offences, that's where they rest, and that means either big fines or lengthy jail sentences. And we've mentioned before how there's been reports of foreign actors paying petty Australian criminals for anti-Semitic acts like vandalism,
Yes,
or bombs that are guaranteed not to go off. It will be amusing to see if any of those petty crims end up getting targeted and charged and prosecuted, because I'd love to hear their defence.
Yeah, I'd like to say, would it all come to light? And maybe not, man. I think if they did actually catch a conspiracy in the wild, they'll probably just be like, "Hey, look, you're going to shut the fuck up about this, and we're just going to quietly put this away." And the entire media apparatus, which would be the watchdog for criminal cases being put away, I guarantee there's back channels to tell them to shut the fuck up about something.
Yeah, it could well be, but I would just love it if one of these guys who doesn't even know how to spell the word Israel when he's putting up graffiti, if that guy gets caught, I would just love to see him on the stand talking about how money was put into his Bitcoin wallet by some foreign actor, while we're all wondering who that foreign actor is.
God. Ah, yes, a foreign actor.
Okay, now, in Victoria, as you can imagine, they are moving almost as fast as New South Wales. Remember, the majority of these attacks, or whatever you call them, have happened in New South Wales, but number two would be Victoria. So the opposition, the Liberal Party under the new leader Brad Batten, who's said to be rejuvenating the party and actually giving him a chance at the next election, they are opposing the bill in its current form. And as you can imagine, this again is because they don't believe it goes far enough. Now, this is despite the fact that, if believe it or not, the original draft of this bill, remember this is a Labor government doing this, they actually put in a defence of political purpose. In other words, you can, if you get charged with an anti-Semitic or racist incident, committing a racist offence, whatever, you can say, well, there was a political point to this. There's a message in it. So, therefore you can't say it's hate speech or whatever. That defence actually exists for 18C. I love the example of the guy who made the Noongar out the front video right here in Perth.
So that's one of my favorite. That's a fucking classic. Yeah. Unfortunately, he cucked.
He did. But that was... sorry, I tell a lie. That wasn't a defense for political purpose. It was for satire. But yeah, very often these kind of laws, they do have exemptions in them. So things like satire, things like political expression are generally included. And, that has spared guys like us the wrath of 18C. Because, even though we might do things like drop racial slurs and that every now and then, if you've ever wondered why don't they go after us for Section 18C of the Racial Vilification Act, it's not because they don't want to or that they're not motivated to. It's because what we do is obviously political commentary. And so it is very easy for us to make that defense. Of course, though, the purpose of these kind of laws on the table in Victoria and New South Wales and having already passed the Commonwealth, is to take those kind of defences away from us. And even though, like, the Liberals would hate to admit this, they're actually capitulating to the demands of the Greens, because the
Yes.
Greens have demanded that those exemptions be repealed, and they've done so for about 20 years, or about the time since, I believe it was 96 when Paul Keating introduced Section 18C of the
I'll
Racial
pull it up.
Discrimination Act. So, Jesus, we're talking nearly 30 years then? I have to remind myself that the
95.
30 years. 95 it came in? Oh, okay. Exactly 30 years.
Sections agency and 18D were added in the RDA of 1985.
Right, okay. So anyway, what is also contained in these proposed laws? This would be introducing new criminal offences for instances of serious vilification, some of which would be subject to a penalty of up to 5 years imprisonment. Wow. So the New South Wales laws said 2 years. These ones, it's up to 5. Trust Victoria to go that little step further. So the government will also expand a proposed religious purpose exemption that would apply to preaching and proselytizing. And get this. So the legal affairs spokesman, the opposition legal affairs spokesman, that is for the Libs, Michael O'Brien, he welcomes these amendments, and he stated that the political purpose defence would have provided a green light to bigots. That's right. This is the party of individual freedom and civil rights, saying that you should not be able to use the defence of political expression when it comes to violating hate speech laws. How very liberal of him.
Jesus fucking Christ. I knew they were gay, but I didn't know they took it that deep.
Yeah. Now, the only thing where he says that things go too far in Labor's legislation is a provision that talks about civil harm. And he said that under these laws, there's a subjective test, meaning that it is not about what a reasonable person would believe to be civil harm. When you talk about a subjective test in political law, in the criminal law, you're talking about how the victim would view it, not how a reasonable person would view it. So, that's an extremely flimsy kind of standard, I think. So, yes, I would agree with him there, with Michael O'Brien there, but not on everything else. He's supporting 5-year prison sentences. He wants the abolition of political defence. No, I'm sorry, this is stuff of a police state, of a coercive, non-democratic state.
Yeah, I'm the most cartoon. I'm the most cartoon fascist you'll find in our entire social circle, and I'm not even this fucking overhanded.
Okay, so let's move on to some other anti-Semitism related news. So there's this artist called Khalid Sabsabi, and also his collaborator Michael D'Agnostino. They were dropped by Creative Australia as representatives at the world's. This is the world's most prestigious arts event, and this is after it was revealed that some of their art depicted a Lebanese terrorist Hassan Nasrallah, in which beams of light shine from his eyes. So,
all right.
In other words, they are glorifying, like as a martyr, Hassan Nasrallah. and they've been dropped. But the arts spokeswoman from the Greens, that is Sarah Hanson-Young, she said the decision to drop them was an appalling capitulation that has plunged arts policy in Australia into crisis. I don't know about that. I mean, look, the arts community generally is, obviously pretty left wing, but there are some big Jewish names involved. Sarah Hanson-Young refuses to see it that way because they refuse to kind of recognize the Jewish lobby as a real ethnic lobby that has ethnic interests and pursues those interests and does so with success. And I mean, just to give you another example of that, the Sydney's Writers' Festival is due to kick off soon. And the esteemed businesswoman, as the Australian puts it, this is Kathy Shand. She is the chair of the Sydney Writers' Festival. And it also just means that she puts a lot of money into it each year. She's a philanthropist, as they say. Anyway, she has dropped off. She's pulling her funding and she's no longer sitting on the chair anymore. And she told the board of the Sydney Writers' Festival that she wanted a variety of opinions on the Middle East conflict, but the program is thought to lean far left, as do most writers' festivals in Australia. I'm glad they put that point in, because, the arts world generally, as I said, is left-leaning, but I would just, argue that the cultural world in the West is just left-leaning, in general. Like, I know sometimes we like to say pick on the arts and academia as being like, particularly left-wing or, driven by modern woke policies or whatever. But it's just every kind of cultural institution you can imagine is the same.
It's the okay. So if you want to figure out how the art community is going to be socially, just ask like the benefactors of the art community what kind of politics do they need to maintain power. Right now, that's the investment class and etc. So yeah, they basically need lots of migrants, super gay, and big mental illness. So of course they're going to be left leaning.
Well, this is also why this is, as the Marxists say, a contradiction, because you mentioned like the donee money, like where's that coming from? Well, in the case of Kathy Shand, you might have guessed it, she's Jewish. So this is one of those contradictions where all of the woke policies that the Jewish lobby has pushed for historically come back to bite them. When people start to see Israel as like a colonial white power, they're very much victims of their own golem in that respect. But yeah, they're pulling back a lot of funding from a lot of different areas. It's not just the Sydney Writers' Festival. And it's just interesting to see where these groups are then going to actually get their money from. Would they start getting it, say, from Muslims? Because it would be pretty hard to do all the gay shit if they're being financed by Muslim groups. And that's just fun to watch. That is another one of those contradictions of the left, where they want to support all the LGBT stuff, but they also want to import people from countries that want to kill LGBT people.
Yes. Unfortunately, those things never dissolve as like not. We're going to pick my words here very carefully. I've never found it very satisfying how those contradictions dissolve, though. They've always just like kind of piddled out, and Muslims just control the group, or they're piddled out and the Muslims were quietly removed.
Yeah, I think when push comes to shove, the leftist groups will side with the homos over the Muslims.
Yeah.
However, very often the Muslims will simply outnumber the lefties. You can see that in many parts of the UK, for example, where they've been successful in basically stopping like sexual education full stop in UK schools. You know, not just the gay shit, but just like talking about sex altogether, pretty much. They've managed to get rid of it. So, yeah, it's
Good
interesting to
stuff,
see that.
Muhammad.
Okay, now also on that note, just to show we're even-handed here, there's one story on Islamophobia. Such a silly term.
They're just heterophobic.
Is that what Eminem said?
Yes.
Oh my god! I think I hate myself.
These are
for knowing.
motherfucking balls. You'll never get hold of them. They belong to my scrotum. You'll never get hold of them. And then he proceeds to make a joke about Versace getting killed.
All right. Well, you were obviously a much bigger fan than I was. You know what I went to on Saturday? I went to this like celebration of '90s music thing in Frio. I felt so young seeing people older than me. It was great.
Man, I should have came. I needed to sell myself off as a rent boy in the next coming months. You know, utilities are spiking.
You probably could have made some good money there, I'd say. But, you know, you'd want to get some danger money to go with that as well, man, because shit. Anyway, so there was reports of two Muslim women, both wearing a hijab. One of them was slapped and punched in the head during her lunch break. This was at a Melbourne shopping centre, and she was on her lunch break working as a childcare worker. Later on in the day, a second Muslim woman was alleged to have been attacked in the same shopping centre. Now, I think like it is pretty much confirmed that these attacks happened and that these were Muslim women and even, you know, you could say visibly Muslim women because they were wearing the hijab.
Yeah.
Look, I'm sorry, that still isn't enough to say that it's an Islamic or Islamophobic attack. You know, there's like a multitude of reasons these might have happened. I don't know what the hell it was, and I'm not saying it necessarily wasn't. But like
people get the shit rocked by crazies all the fucking time here. I don't think a hijab or a niqab or
randomly hit you.
Yeah. I don't think fucking Islamic garb is like some kind of protection or only protects you only from a genuinely Islamophobic. I said homophobic there. Islamophobic attack. Like like crazy people get rocked all the time. I'm going to need, you know, someone to be like, oh yeah, by the way, he screamed, fuck you, you dirty, you know, fucking death to the Ummah or some shit like that, you know.
That's it. Like if they said that, I'd be like, okay, sure, I'll give you it then. But there's nothing of that. There's no reports of it. All it is that these women were assaulted at this shopping centre. That's it. But still, that was enough for Albanese, the Prime Minister, to actually make public comment on this. And he said that it was clearly a racist attack and that no one should feel unsafe because of their identity in Australia. It's like, why comment on this stuff when you don't even know really what happened? You simply know there was an assault. You know nothing about the motivations, at least not yet. Okay. All right, let's get on to immigration. Now, last week, of course, we discussed the deal that was reached between the Australian and Nauruan governments. This is basically the cohort of detainees who were released under the High Court decision that found indefinite detention is illegal. Basically, we reached an agreement to send them to Nauru, and that meant the immediate resettlement of 3 offenders, because most of them are offenders. That's part of the reason why. You know, like other countries refuse to take them in. And one of them is actually a murderer. So, yeah. When the Greens say that we should basically just let those people go in Australia, they're usually the details they conveniently leave out.
Yeah.
Anyway, we said that, we basically support this, and for me, it's like the only piece of non-white foreign aid that I'm in favor of. Dumping our undesirables, undesirable refugees or refuses or whatever the hell they are. And
bipedal locusts.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you're from Nauru or whatever, I would respect you in that, you would oppose that because you want to look out for your own national interest. But look, I'm an Australian nationalist, so I'm supporting our interests. So
we can compromise and fire them into the sun. How about that? Can we shake on that?
Man, do you remember when Alexandria Mussolini's granddaughter?
Oh yes,
she said that the Italian Navy should just fire missiles at refugee boats. She said they just take them out before they even enter our waters.
She had some genuinely decent fucking quotes, to be honest.
Oh, she did. I can think of one right now, but I'm not going to.
Yeah.
Relay it because I would actually be violating hate speech laws, so I won't.
Yes.
No matter how true it is. Google the choice lines by her.
Google the fucking shit she said. She was a fucking riot. She still is kind of a riot. She's still in the political scene over there.
Google what you said about the transgender member of Parliament, of Italian Parliament. It's classic. So anyway, the Nauruan president. I'm sorry, I don't know the guy's name. David Ranabok. David Ranabok Adenang. Anyway, he gave an address recently where, of course, he was roundly criticised for basically just accepting a bribe from Australia in resettling these people. Because as I said, they are offenders, often very serious, violent offenders. And he said, well, look, they would still be subject to the laws of Nauru, and they would be entitled to a normal and peaceful life. Maybe they have less than 100% pristine backgrounds, but we all get along fine. Yeah, not exactly pristine. One of them's a murderer. But anyway, I'm not going to attack you. You've agreed to take them off our hands, so good on you. But yeah, look, he did sort of dance around the questions of the fact that Nauru is broke. It's a third world country that obviously survives off Australian and other Western aid, and when it comes to receiving Western aid, well, they've got to actually give a bit, and that is how they do it. Now, on that note, though, opposition to this is not really coming from ordinary people in Nauru, as you might expect it would. No, it's coming from the human rights lobby here in Australia. So, this deal between the two governments is going to be challenged by the Human Rights Law Centre. So they have already made an application to the High Court, highest court in the land, to have this agreement made null and void.
Do you think humanitarian NGO workers stay inside their gay bars because they're scared of the foreigners that they've imported down here on the outside?
Yeah. Now, look, this was expected. As soon as this agreement was announced, prepare for the impending High Court battle, because there's no way they're going to just let that one slip. So the legal director of Human Rights Law Centre, Laura John, she said that third-party removal laws introduced by Tony Burke would set a dangerous precedent for the kind of treatment refugees and migrants are subjected to. No one should be permanently exiled to a country that is not their home. Ripping people from their lives and stranding them offshore is cruel, lifelong punishment. Well, Australia is also a foreign land, but they're very intent on living here. The difference is obvious. Australia is a
God,
first world.
let's send them back home. Let's do some basic detective work and send them back home so they can be rightfully fucking punished in front of the eyes of God.
Right. I mean, you know what would happen if we actually returned that Rohingya man to Myanmar? You know what would fucking happen to him? Something justified, I would say. But no, like another reason why you have people in indefinite detention, it's not always because the host country refuses to accept them. It's also because Australia will refuse to extradite them if they would be facing torture or the death penalty. That is part of our foreign relations policy. We will not extradite anyone facing those threats. So, yeah, in the case of that guy, I think actually Myanmar just said, no, we don't want him. But yeah, in other cases, yeah, we don't want them to be executed, so they just languish in Australian detention, seemingly forever. Okay, so another thing that they've said, that the Human Rights Law Centre has said, that that could bolster the case of other convicted criminals fighting to stay in the country. So, like, if you were in court over the status of your visa or whatever, you could actually then make the argument, hey, look, if I'm sent out of Australia, they're going to send me to Nauru. And, you know, they're going to send me to a very, very dangerous country with a high rate of criminality. Therefore, you should take that into account. And you know what? They do actually have a point there. But it's not like we can't fix that. That would simply mean, say, another directive would have to be made to the Administrative Review Tribunal. That's something we're going to talk about right next story, I believe. Basically saying that, no, that's not good enough. You can't take that into consideration. You simply have to consider the safety of the public in making the decision on whether or not to cancel their visa. So, yeah, even though that argument holds some weight, it's not like we couldn't fix it with ministerial directives. We definitely could. Okay, now, talking about directives and the controversial minister at the time, Andrew Giles, who was then immigration minister, he had what was called Directive 99. And that was a directive to the AAT, as it was back then, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, that ties to Australia had to be taken into account when cancelling a visa. So a lot of people took their cancelled visa to the AAT and said, hey, look, I've got like a partner in Australia, I've got a job, therefore I've got significant ties to Australia, can you please reinstate my visa? And there were a number of visas that were reinstated. They were mainly documented by the Australian newspaper. So that's one of them, because I've got a subscription to the Australian. That's why, you know, we've covered so many of those. But anyway, Andrew Giles then repealed Directive 99 and introduced Directive 110 that was at least supposed to promote the opposite, which is that strong ties to Australia should not be held as paramount, should not be held to be more important than Australian safety. So, you know, it wouldn't really matter if you had a job, if you had family in Australia. If you're deemed to be a threat to the Australian public, you should have your visa cancelled.
And it's not like it's a hop, skip, and a jump to get to that position in the first place where that is being considered. The level of criminality I've seen everyone but say, like, I literally, the only time I've actually ever seen this being applied liberally was to an Irish person I knew. that was just because of speeding. But yeah, to get there, it is, unless you're a white person, it is incredibly fucking difficult. There's whole fucking types of different NGOs, legal support councils to make sure you do not end up in this position.
Oh yeah. I was going to say that, like, if you look, well, we'll give you an example now, but usually there's people who end up in front of the AAT or the ART. It's either that they've done like a really serious crime, like rape or murder, or they have a long string of, like, medium severity crimes like burglary,
drug dealing, like drug possession, and burglary, armed robbery. I saw a case of the guy was a bikie, like through and through, and he did get sent back to New Zealand. No, we covered this one. There's a bikie that got sent back to New Zealand, and if you actually looked at his criminal record, he had like 15 different counts of armed burglary.
Yeah. These people are always scumbags, like every single one of them. And it's amazing that, like the human rights, what are they called again? Human Rights Law Centre. Like, these are the people that they choose to defend, some of just the worst pieces of shit that society can offer. But anyway, the story that we've got here from The Australian is actually showing how Directive 110 may not have gone far enough, because in this case we've got someone who is a dual US and Australian citizen. His name is Robert Michael Main. He served 33 years in jail in Australia for murder. But because he's a dual citizen, having emigrated here when he was 12 years old, the ART has found that he has strong ties to Australia and should be allowed to stay. Okay? So this is despite the fact that the wording is different in Directive 110, where it emphasises public safety. But still, that mention of having strong ties to Australia and having to take that into account, this was enough for the ART to say that despite the fact this guy spent 33 years in jail for murder, his ties are still strong enough so that he should be allowed to stay. Wow. So I'm sorry, Andrew Giles. Obviously, your directive did not go far enough. Or we would say that, like, the ART is obviously stacked politically to the left. I would kind of say both are true. In complete fairness to Andrew Giles, I would say if he were to be making this decision himself, he would choose to cancel the man's visa. In fact, it de facto was his decision. You think about it, like when a visa is cancelled, it's officially the decision from the minister, even if they didn't directly overlook it. But no, I mean, I've heard stories of people like clearly not having like enough evidence for whatever visa that they've applied for. For example, they have not submitted their police record, and that's a requirement for most visas. I've heard stories of people applying to the AAT or the ART where they clearly have, not met the criteria, and then the AAT just remits the decision to court and lets them apply all over again. And they never give a good reason as to why they've done that. From that, I can only conclude that you basically have far left activists stacking the ART. I can't think of any other reason.
They've always been very good at entryism, mostly because they come from the families get allowed into those institutions in the first place.
Right. Well, like what I was saying before about how it's not just arts and academia that are, stacked with people of the left. Yeah, it's everything. It's fucking administrative tribunals. It's the judiciary. It's I would say the administrative side of the police force. Not the rank and file members, but like the senior sergeants and that. All of them, they're just fucking top to bottom. The slow march through the institutions. The left absolutely accomplished that.
Fenian, as you can tell by my prestigious spot in this institution, you can tell that I'm triple yuppied up for #Team Bottom.
Yeah, but they still say that, white supremacy is like the prevailing power in Australia or something, you
Oh,
know?
fuck, I wish.
Is that why our guys get arrested for loitering when celebrating Australia Day?
Yeah,
Is that
okay.
is
Like,
that
what?
white
What's
privilege?
the two real big, or maybe three big powers in Australia? Concurrently. Um, in my opinion, it's a certain anger and panic of a certain religious group. They'll go unnamed. Um, Property lobbyists or property developers or investors at least, and mining magnates in that order.
Yeah. Oh God, we got something on Clive Palmer coming up
Oh
later
fuck.
on. Speaking of mining magnates. Okay. Now let's talk about. This was actually a fairly big story in immigration news this week. Tony Burke is being accused of a fairly elaborate vote buying scheme by holding these mass citizenship ceremonies where they are pushing through thousands of people who have apparently been on waiting lists to receive their citizenship. Now, why would they be doing this now? Tony Burke is saying that there is one reason and one reason only for this, and that is that there is a massive backlog of people waiting. He made the point that these people are from many different parts of Australia, because it was first brought to light that he was holding these ceremonies himself personally uh, in Western Sydney. Remember, his seat, his electorate is in Western Sydney, and he is one of the Labor frontbenchers who's actually under threat from the Muslim vote. That is, the teal-like campaign to host Muslim independence, mainly in parts of Western Sydney. So anyway, I'll just go through. Here's the background of some of these people who are apparently in the backlog. So I'm going to read their country of origin and how many of them there are. So India, 2,365. New Zealand, 1,929. Britain, 853. The Philippines, 581. China, 556. Pakistan, 396. Vietnam, 381. And Afghanistan, 289. Now, I just wanted to read that to point out like how demographic trends have kind of changed in recent years. I'm sure listeners are not surprised at all to hear that India was number one there, but maybe you're surprised to hear that China was so far down the list, because for a
Mm.
while China was definitely right up there. But also, like historically, the biggest country for immigration to Australia has been Britain. And then I believe Ireland was like closely behind. You notice there, Ireland didn't even make the list. So, and
No.
also, let me add that Britain and New Zealand were the only white countries in that list.
I was about to make a joke. Jesus Christ, the most concerning there is New Zealand is fucking scum of the earth.
Yeah, that was another group where, like, you could say, "Oh, I wish they were the problem again." Because I remember there was like a thing about how Kiwis would come over here and go on the dole because it was easier for them. I don't think it is anymore, but like previously, it was easy for them, and some of them would do it because Australia had a more generous social security system than New Zealand did.
Yeah, I can see that. I remember back in the day, like my extended family complaining that the younger parts of my extended family over there complaining that like they made it hard to get any kind of government youth allowance or housing allowance because because the Maoris are better than the Aborigines in some ways. I have to mince my words here quite a bit. Now I'm just remembering, but They still use welfare about the same amount, but they are a much larger proportion of the population than Indigenous Australians are here. So they use proportionally a significantly larger amount, making it basically impossible, even if they had the same entry, barriers or bars to entry as Australian welfare system has. It just makes it harder because there's simply a lot less of it to go around.
Yeah, but I also just mean to make the point of looking at that issue in the face of current migration trends.
Oh,
it was nothing at all. It was a very, very minor inconvenience in our overall immigration policy, and that was it.
I'm not even joking. The migration debate, and this is what other people are saying. These are not my opinions. These are opinions that I'm simply hearing. The migration debate went from you having to explain why some kind of large scale Chinese migration is bad because of economics, national security, and etc. That was the debate, and then it was just well, with the Middle Eastern Lebanese migration, you're getting ethnic conflict and ethno-religious conflict as well, and we're still seeing that. That's true. Well, with Indians now being a thing, it's just you just point.
Yeah. So anyway, look, that's actually me reading those numbers off. That's a bit of a tangent. But look, this was actually first brought up, funnily enough, or at least this is where I first heard the story, was Peter Dutton at the anti-Semitism conference. And he talked about how, Labor were just cynically vote buying from immigrants. And yeah, I mean, this is what they're accused of doing, is being able to fast track citizenship and making sure that Labor is very much the face of that. And that's why Tony Burke is personally presiding over some of these ceremonies and effectively saying, okay, well, look, you're Australian citizens now. You've got those dole rights and Medicare rights and everything else that goes with it. And remember who gave it to you. Oh, and by the way, there's an election in a month. So, yeah. Now, on that note, various mayors in the different councils of Sydney, who fall under this cohort of people, they actually said that if there is a backlog of people waiting for citizenship, they were not aware of it or it did not exist. Or they said it was somehow manufactured in that numbers were kept from them by the federal government. So in other words, when these mass ceremonies were announced, it caught them by surprise. They're just used to the regularly scheduled ones, for example, the ones that they have on Australia Day. They had no idea that this was coming, and they certainly had no idea that there was a supposed backlog. So this is looking very sketchy, to say the least. Now, so in response to this, Tony Burke said it was outrageous to suggest that people who have been fully processed and passed every check under law should be prevented from making their pledge of lifelong commitment to our country. That's not the point, Tony. The point is that you're fast-tracking their citizenship in very public ceremonies that you're presiding over. No one is saying that they should be prevented from their citizenship. In fact, they've already been approved for it. So he's completely ignoring the issue here. Now, when he was on Sky News about this, he said that the coalition criticism on this issue was weird. And he said, what we have was a huge backlog of people who were entitled to have these citizenship ceremonies, and different councils weren't having enough ceremonies. I just say to the people who are complaining, have a bit of patriotism about this. People standing up and saying, I want to make a lifelong pledge of commitment to Australia is a good thing. See that little fucking dirty trick this cunt is using? He did the same thing when it came to, so-called neo-Nazis celebrating Australia Day. because I don't know if you remember, he said, if you don't love Australia, then you should leave. You know, the fucking gall of an anti-white immigration minister saying to Australian nationalists that they hate Australia and should leave the country. And here he is here saying that, like, you're just being unpatriotic because you're somehow against the pledge of commitment of these people to make to Australia as citizens. Again, completely avoiding the fucking issue.
I could make some analogy about like a malfunctioning immune system and parasites, or like literally a hostile immune system and parasites. I don't really feel like doing that. I think this is just so fucking cut and dry. Even retarded Freddy would figure this one out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I should have read this out at the beginning, but you want to know how many ceremonies we're talking about here? How many extra ceremonies we're talking about? 12,500.
Fuck. I was going to say like a couple hundred. Jesus Christ.
No, 12,500, which that was the number anyway that was given by Susan Ley, the deputy Liberal leader. So, yeah, you know, if there was just a few or whatever, okay, I can imagine that. But look, if it was because of the backlog, how the fuck could you let the backlog grow to the point where you would need 12,500 ceremonies to push them all through? How could it possibly have grown to that number in that length of time? I just don't see it. All right. Last story in immigration. This one, small white pill, very, very small. And that is the number of working holiday visas in Australia has surged all at the same time that student visas are on the decline because of the cap that Labor, amazingly, did put on it. And can you believe this? The student lobby is saying that full fee paying Asian students are losing out to blonde-haired, blue-eyed British backpackers. So, most people who, you know, are on those working holiday visas, you know, they often we just refer to them as backpackers. You know, they're here for a working holiday. They work in fruit picking and that kind of thing. So apparently, in December, their numbers actually rose to 200,000, all in line, like I said, with a general reduction in student visas. So that is, what did it say here? Hold on, that can't be right. Oh, yeah. So the numbers surged to 206,187 in December. So their figures recently revealed by Home Affairs. And the number of British backpackers is almost 50,000. So you're talking, what is that, like around 25% of the overall number? Can you believe it? Now, one thing I've got a, small reality check, though. How many people from Britain are actually non-white?
Yeah.
So we obviously have to take that into consideration.
We have to check the friend or foe tags on that one, buddy.
Yeah, so this guy, he's from bloody some immigration lobby group. What's his name? Phil Honeywood. So he's the International Education Association. The chief of the International Education Association. In other words, this guy is from the lobby group that lobbies for big education. To absolutely fill our country with foreign students, which I might remind people is a $40 billion a year industry. It's one of our biggest sectors of the economy, in fact. But this guy he likes to play the race card. So he was the one who said that Asian students are losing out to blonde-haired, blue-eyed British backpackers. And he said that international students were being blamed for all the ills of the world, while backpackers were being given preferences over young Asian students who want to put money for an Australian qualification. Sorry, pay money for an Australian qualification. Okay, what he's saying there, he's like, oh, think of the money that they are contributing to the Australian economy. Okay, think of how many of them earn the qualification and then go back and work in another country. And also think of the remittance payments that they're making. And maybe also think about this. Think of how many of them are not real students and are here just working jobs and sending most of that money back as well. He doesn't mention any of that. But yeah, look, what we're actually finding here is that we are seeing a small increase in the amount of British migration in Australia at the expense of Asian migration. So if you want a small white pill, I'm sorry it's only that small, but there you go.
It's something. You got something out of us. Just be happy.
You got something. That's pretty rare coming from us. Well, you got it. Okay, let's move on to climate and energy. Well, I guess you could say this one is a white pill as well. I think last week we talked about how the front bench in South Australia's Labor government was playing down or talking down what was their trademark climate change project, which was a hydrogen energy plant. Now, this was supposed to be a $600 million plant. As I said, it was part of their platform when they went to the last South Australian election. Well, guess what? It has been scrapped completely.
Good.
No longer on the agenda. Now, some people are saying that this is basically to do with what's happening in Whyalla at the moment with like the steelworks kind of in the shit. They're saying, why would we be focusing on these green energy projects when existing industries are hemorrhaging and losing workers and, it just being generally bad for the economy, etc. That may well have something to do with it. I don't doubt that. But just in case you weren't keeping count, this is the 5th major hydrogen project to be scrapped in only a year. I believe it was last week we covered the one in Queensland.
Yep.
It's actually like an existing project, but it required an extra $1 billion of funding by the Queensland government, and the new LNP government said, no, that's too much. I mean, $1 billion is enough for a hydrogen project as a whole. I mean, as I just mentioned, this one in South Australia was supposed to only cost $600 million. But in Queensland, they needed an extra $1 billion in additional funding.
Yeah,
in other words, let's blow out.
The problem is that they can't sell a hydrogen product off of what they originally, and they know this, by the way, because it's very fucking simple, very, very straightforward process, very simple calculation to figure this out. But what they do is they put in a tender which bargains quietly on the fact that they'll get reasonably cheap energy from the grid for a green hydrogen setup. And then they say, well, actually, they'll be green because we'll be using renewables when that's not the case. One of the first things they actually go to quietly install is a mains hookup. And They say that's for facility electricity and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it doesn't end up being the fucking case. Especially because you can tell, because even what the FMG's test site, they actually put in a request for like a multi-megawatt basically power hookup for their green hydrogen test facility. You don't need megawatts to power a facility. You need megawatts to power something to convert large amounts of water into hydrogen. That's what you need it for. The only hydrogen project that I think will survive and will be long-term economically viable is the blue ones, which is just fucking a less efficient version of liquid natural gas.
Which one is snowy hydro? Is that blue or green?
That's just a hydroelectric dam near the.
Okay, right.
But when you're talking about hydrogen projects, you're talking about the generation of hydrogen.
Yeah. Now, look, obviously I don't know as much about this stuff as you do, but what I always found with hydrogen projects was like they were kind of seen as a compromise in that like solar and wind were viewed as unreliable. But the kind of green energy that like the conservative side of politics could get behind was hydrogen because at least that was reliable.
You can store hydrogen. Hydrogen isn't so much a method of energy production purely itself. It's a method of energy storage.
Right. And obviously the issue with solar and wind is that the expensive part is building the battery because the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine.
Yeah.
So it's a bit different with hydrogen.
Yeah, I'll say like you could make a green hydrogen setup that's mega fucking expensive, would have a time scale in the decades, and at the end of it, would it produce enough energy for a snapshot of Australia at the time, maybe the decade that it was started? Yeah, you could do that. You definitely could do that. Could you create a 5 to 7 year plan to create a blue hydrogen facility that could reasonably be scaled for nationwide energy usage? Yes, you could do that too. Definitely could do that. Is any of that really happening with these projects? And is any of those individual reasons, rationales, why these things are being done in the first place? No. And because this is me conjecting, I believe that these projects are just simply industrial investment fraud cases. I believe that they are purposely undersold at the beginning. And then, you see exactly what we saw just then. Later down the line, they're asking for another $1 billion.
Right. Well, let me remind people that Snowy Hydro, the federal government's flagship hydrogen project, is $10 billion over budget. The original budget was $2 billion. It's now up to $12 billion and counting. And they're dealing with industrial action now as well. So,
yeah. Well, that's the case of a properly spaced out hydroelectric dam can be done, but Snowy Hydro was always like a piss take for fucking money. To be honest, I think people figured that out. I think the public figured that out 3 years into the project.
Yeah, and it's a running joke now. Like it was supposed to be operational a long time ago, but they're still drilling the holes, and they keep encountering like rock that's too hard for them. Like they keep running into terrain that they say they need like new excavating technology for because they just can't deal with it. Yeah, and now workers are going on strike because they think it's unsafe. Okay. Anyway, as I said, the steelworks in Whyalla is actually, it is so bad that it's just been put into administration. Now, this was something that the coalition actually referred to as basically nationalisation of the steelworks industry in South Australia. Yeah, it is, but it's not like the government intends on holding on to it forever, though. Governments in Australia just don't do that. Okay, no matter how much like some people say we need to like nationalize mines or whatever. Remember, this country couldn't even nationalize the banks under Chifley. So the idea that this would be a long-term thing, no way. This is definitely temporary. But anyway, all of the funds that were supposed to go into that hydrogen plant are going to be reallocated to the Whyalla Steelworks. And on top of that, the Albanese government has announced a $2.4 billion support package for it. Having such a large industrial project go belly up a month or two prior to an election is obviously a very, very bad thing, and no government would want that. Albeit, it is in South Australia where, they tend to vote Labor anyway. But yeah, it doesn't look good. And the federal government also said that they're considering taking it under administration themselves, partly. So in other words, you would have nationalisation at the Commonwealth level. But again, I stress that would only be be temporary. There's no way they'd hold on to it. All right. So, well, let's see what you think of this one, Nolsey. I got to admit, this is one I didn't really read too deeply into, but the deep coral in Ningaloo Reef, which is here in Western Australia, is apparently undergoing complex bleaching for the first time ever on record. So the marine stress is because of a marine heat wave along half of the West Australian coastline that has bleached coral from Ningaloo up to Ashmore Reef, which is a record first. So, yeah, I don't know. Does that mean our coral is about to die?
No, not really. Bleaching is just a stress reaction. Even then, with the I'm even like having another look at this thing. They've just collected spot data, and mostly around Exmouth. They've collected a handful of spot data where, like, you get Exmouth. Oh, I wonder what's going on with fucking Exmouth. Why is Exmouth like that? I will say that it is concerning. It is damage. And Ningaloo Reef will, I mean, as reefs migrate, because yes, reefs do migrate. As like kind of the Great Barrier Reef kind of like breaks down and migrates either further out into the ocean or literally up further north, shrinking it supposedly. The Ningaloo Reef would actually be a really interesting tourist attraction for Western Australia. And yes, this is damaged, but honestly, it's more so to do with like these like mega seasonal tropical water flow. And they're saying like, oh, actually, no, it's to do with like record temperature. It's like, I don't think air temperature above the water really affects the fucking water temperature below, especially, at this thing's average depth of 14 to 15 fucking meters down.
Yeah, I was going to say it's like right at the bottom, isn't it? So
Yes.
they even mentioned that in the article, actually.
Yeah, no, it's a stress reaction. It's not dead. It just doesn't like what's going on right now. It didn't like this summer, basically.
Okay. Doesn't sound as serious as they're making it out to be then.
It's CSIRO data, man. What do you expect?
Okay. All right. So I guess this is somewhat related to the Whyalla steelworks. So the federal government will set ambitious targets to use locally made steel and aluminium in renewable projects.
What?
So that would include offshore wind, and that is part of a $500 million funding commitment. Yeah, I remember reading also that like the bailout for Whyalla Steelworks was also based on like making steel and aluminium products for green energy projects like wind and solar. So they always have to include that in there, don't they? Because most greenies, when they hear steelworks, they just think of dirty industrial plants polluting the air.
Greasy, sweaty men, their bare shirts out. No, okay, dude, making fucking steel. Yeah, there are some electro-winning ways to make steel, but it's a fucking nightmare, and it's basically not really doable on the large scale. Making aluminium, on the other hand, yeah, you can do that. One of the old names for aluminium back in the day was condensed electricity.
Right.
So if you got electricity, you can get aluminium, but fucking steel and steel production is yeah, the carbon's there for a reason, my man.
Well, look, this is part of the Future Made in Australia fund. So this is about revitalising Australian manufacturing in the pursuit of renewable energy technology. So Albanese said that every new wind tower needs hundreds of tons of steel. Why should that steel come from anywhere but here? This is Steel City. Steel making in the Illawarra has delivered generations of good blue-collar jobs. So there you go. He's trying to appeal to the greenies and the blue collar workers at the same time there, as to whether
Look,
or not
we need. If he wants to get steel production at any reasonable scale started back in this country again, I know he did talk about some minor steel production works and etc. that do still happen in this country, but those are Illawarra Valley Steel is mostly for fucking like structural samples and test samples. It's mostly like we are producing steel at a very specific grade with a very specific chemical constitution because you can't trust China for that, unfortunately.
right.
It's literally ask any steel merchant if you ever find them about dealing with say things like stainless steel or even like mild steel, trying to get like consistent mild steel and consistent thicknesses and chemical comp out of China. It's fucking impossible. So yeah, we do have like a modicum of steel production over here, but any reasonable level of production, you'd need $10 billion today, $10 billion tomorrow, and about 5 years of doing that, you may have fucking scratched back what we had in the fucking 50s over here.
Okay, well, I was going to say, I just saw this on the news today, but Labor is in serious trouble when it comes to the seat of Hunter, which is the only regional seat that Labor hold. And I think it's been that way for a long time. So it was previously held by Joel Fitzgibbon. And now, oh God, I can't remember the guy's name. He's 6'8", like he was like an Olympic shooter. Sorry, let me just Google his name. But Hunter is like, yeah, it's semi-regional. And the reason why it is safe, or used to be safe labor, not anymore, is because it's home of a lot of mining workers. Dan Repicoli is his name. And he was actually a former miner himself. A proper, like, working class guy. He never went to uni. Now, it's obvious that Labor, like, rolled him out because over the years, they have lost votes in Hunter to the point where it's no longer a safe Labor seat. And in fact, this year, they think it could just be lost altogether. Now, that's despite the fact when you look at their member, Dan Repicoli, he's very pro-mining and he's very pro-coal. He's said to be kind of to the right when it comes to Labor factions. The problem is, though, when you go out and ask the everyday voter in Hunter if they believe him, they basically say no. A lot of people say, well, look, I like him, he's a good bloke or whatever, but the Labor Party as a whole, Albanese, they're greenies, so they're getting too close to the green groups, and they want to shut down the coal mines and everything. So, this might be the election where Labor finally lose every single one of their regional seats. Even if they have a guy who is pro-mining and pro-coal. All right. Last story on climate and energy. I remember covering this at the time. This e-scooter manufacturer called Beam Mobility. Those annoying fucking scooters that people use in the city, and they don't own them. They just pick up and drop them off, and ours are orange, aren't they?
Yeah. We do have purple ones in the city proper, but like the ones in like Scarborough and etc. Fremantle, they're orange.
Okay. Well, anyway,
did I send you a photo of one being thrown into a ditch?
I think so. Yeah, I think.
Yeah. I was walking back from a fucking run, and there's like this gigantic. I'm just explaining to the audience. There's this gigantic, almost like agricultural drainage trough size fucking ditch, like a good fucking like apartment building, like a flat sized ditch, and then right smack bang in the middle of it, fucking a good 2.5 meters down, is just a lone fucking e-scooter. I'm just like, what sad cunt's job is it to go collect that?
Right. Well, anyway, what these guys were doing, Beam Mobility, was they were cheating councils that they were selling the scooters of. Now, how they would do it, like each scooter, as you can imagine, they've got to pay a registration fee for them. What they were doing was getting them. They were putting like more out there than there actually was. So, in other words, they were selling them and receiving money for them, but they weren't actually paying for the registration fees. This was putting more of them out there because there's a cap. You can only have a certain amount of scooters before it starts to become, if not a nuisance, dangerous.
That was a good business strategy, or at least a good fraud strategy. Like, how the fuck would you figure out that there's more than the fixed amount, considering that every waking fucking moment some retard is transporting them around?
I'm not sure. Well, look, I've opened up the article. This was August last year. So it said local governments are investigating allegations Beam deliberately went over the cap of scooters in some places by as much as 30%, depriving them of potentially thousands of dollars per day in lost revenue. So it said, oh, that's right. So they actually, Beam Mobility released a statement to the Australian saying that they were deeply apologetic for exceeding vehicle allocations, but insisted it was unintentional, and emphatically rejected any suggestion that this was a scheme to deprive councils of revenue. Okay, well, the courts here did not agree for that, and in fact, they're now on the hook to give generous payouts to 7 Australian councils who were shortchanged by Beam Mobility. And by the way, this didn't just include Australia. Apparently, it happened overseas as well. They've got contracts with other governments too. So this was pretty elaborate. It's a Singaporean-based company. I don't know. Take from that what you will. All right. Let's move on to the economy. So we did actually get that interest rate cut of 25 basis points, or 0.25%. It may not be enough for Labor. Obviously, it's a relief to a lot of people. In terms of the overall effect it would have in reducing cost of living, it would be pretty negligible. And it's estimated that if there is going to be another rate cut, it won't be till the very end of the year. So,
I mean, people were understandably disappointed with, this kind of medial cut. I know that there's plans, and they more or less fucking hinted at, that they're going to get it properly down to probably like 3.5, or they're going to try for 3.5. But, I can understand people hurting with mortgages not being enthused by this.
Yeah, it's a drop in the ocean for them. Yeah. And then in terms of the flow-on effects for the rest of the economy, it's an even more diluted drop in the ocean, I'd say. Now, apparently another reason why we would not be seeing another rate cut until at least the end of the year is because, well, believe it or not, according to the ABS, our jobs market is strong. So in the last month, there were around 44,000 people who found new work. And but still, if you go from the unemployment rate that we had in December, it was 4%, and unemployment actually rose to 4.1% in January. So there's still a slight uptick in unemployment. And also, the rate of underemployment has remained steady at 6%. But in terms of kind of measuring the overall health of the jobs market, we're being told that this is good. I guess if you want to talk relatively speaking in terms of how good the economy has been since COVID or whatever, then yeah, relatively speaking, I guess it's a strong market. But still, us, the average person, do they feel better off now than what they did, say, 2 years ago? Most people will say no, or at least they'll say they feel the same. So yeah, and a lot of the jobs that people want, in that they're aspiring for a promotion, or for a better paying job in another industry. There's not that much mobility. Not many people
no one's going anywhere. I'm normally able to advance like my wage up year on year by like a couple percent. Normally I'm able to keep up with inflation at like 3%, but like, dude, that's not fucking happening. It's just not happening.
Yeah, and I mean, you Knowles, you're from the kind of upper middle class, and dare I say, the oven middle class. That's right. It's when you guys start to get affected that you really start to have a revolutionary base, or at least a political base that will affect real change. Not the kind of change.
You got people with you got people with funding a political body money.
Well, that's obviously one factor. Yes, is that you guys have the funds to give political donations that can end up meaning a difference. It may not be at Clive Palmer levels, but it's still significant enough. I mean, a good example is just look at the Climate 200 program. There's no reason why we shouldn't have like rich philanthropists funding us in the nationalist movement. We just kind of need the first domino to fall. But as we know, that's very difficult to get started. Yep. But the thing is, though, once the middle classes and the upper middle classes start to actually feel affected by things like migration, that's when the working class suddenly have a powerful ally, and they start pushing for real, meaningful change, not the empty promises of the two major parties. Okay, so on to housing. So there's a new Productivity Commission report that just came out, apparently kind of agreeing with what the Master Builders Association has been saying for a while, and that is that one of the reasons for the slowdown in housing supply is simply that we don't have enough construction workers. So the report found that apparently we need around 130,000 new construction workers in Australia. That is the amount needed if we were to reach the National Housing Accord target of 1.2 million homes by 2029.
Probably, but why the fuck do we need 1.2 million more homes by 2029? Yeah.
No, we just need less people here.
Yes.
There's a mass deportation.
Simple answer. What's easy to do? Put pen to paper and change legislation, or put fucking brick, mortar, and concrete down? Apparently, it's the fucking latter.
Look, the main reason, like, the NBA is like touting this report is because they want the government to have more flexible working visas. They're trying to tell us that this shortage is just caused by a lack of foreign skilled labor, and we need to have like special classes of visas that prioritize people in the building trades. We already have that, though. Maybe Labor doesn't go quite as far as the coalition because they still have some relationship left with the trade union movement. But no, there's a multitude of reasons why. Like I actually would say, yeah, there is a general shortage of construction workers. But there's a lot of different reasons for that.
It's because we hollowed out our construction industry and basically forced either the construction worker, the unskilled one, to go into benefits or retail, or the skilled one to literally just go into small private work doing maintenance and repairs.
Yeah, and I mean, the government has put the CFMEU into administration now. Basically, that means that the only effective union that was in that industry was castrated by the government that is supposed to be its ally. But I've made this little rant before, but I also just think it's like the cult of the uni student, like the idea. We still tell everyone in high school, like, you must go to uni to succeed. We very rarely tell them, hey, you know what? Financially, you would probably be better off taking on a trade. Most students would anyway.
I can still say in total I've made more money using a 22-ounce hammer in a year than I have using a pen or a keyboard.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked on construction sites as well. It's been, God, more than 10 years since I have. But, man, when I was working those jobs, I earned some bloody good money. And I love taking the overtime, being able to take, like, double time on the weekends and just take home an absolute fucking killing. That was great. I'm probably never seeing that again. Never will I see that again. All right. Okay, so the New South Wales government has announced the rollout of a second phase of its housing and planning reform. So this is new low and mid-rise policy. So you can imagine what that means. These are apartment blocks that are low and mid-rise. They're not, I think over 10 stories is when you move into high-rise. And they reckon that is going to create around 100,000 homes. So Labor's target is of 377,000 new homes by 2029. And it hopes to deliver 112,000 new homes across the state over the next 5 years in the areas of Illawarra, Hunter, and the Central Coast. So they're not just focusing on the metro area in Sydney, although, those are still going up too. Harry Triggerboff is still making a killing in that regard. Now, what I don't like about this is, well, obviously, for one thing, this is high-density living. But further to that, these reforms would change planning controls. That means that there is less say from local councils and local property owners when it comes to how big apartment blocks can be around their area. So, one of the big things that comes up is, like, people say that their view of whatever is hindered if you build a 20-story apartment block in front of someone's house. Obviously, you're obstructing their view. That's only just one example, though. But basically, those kind of constraints or those kind of powers that councils have are going to be eroded by the New South Wales government.
Oh boy.
So, yeah, that just means more and more people to pack into the cans of sardines. Over in Melbourne, here's our other story and last story on housing. Same thing. So, building height limits will be increased in multiple Melbourne suburbs, meaning that they will be at least 10 stories high. So there are 10 areas labelled as activity centres. So Broadmeadows, Epping, Nadiri, North Essendon, and Preston in the city's north, Ringwood and Camberwell Junction, Frankston, Moorabbin, and Chadstone in the southeast. Apologies for any mispronunciations. I'm sure there was at least a couple. This is part of a broader policy that they announced in 2023, which was to build more high-density housing in Melbourne. And the aim there is to construct 60,000 new homes in these high activity centres by the end of 2051. All right, well, there's a goal you might actually be able to make, Victoria.
Probably, yeah.
I was expecting it to say like 2029, but okay, 2051, yeah, okay. That sounds doable, actually.
I was going to say, like, what number was the megacity that made up Australia in the Judge Dredd comics? I can't remember. I'm starting to feel that way, you know. Peach trees.
I often think, you know, like when you watched like futuristic dystopian movies when you were a little kid, like we're there now, you know. And a lot of those movies that you watched back then, they were actually set around now. I mean, like Back to the Future, for example, was set in 2015, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Actually, 10 years ago now. So yeah, it's like, you know, you live in that bloody cyberpunk dystopian future. You're there already.
No, we're in the cyberspunk dystopian future because it's gay as shit.
Well, yeah.
I've used that joke a whole bunch of times, but like it's a good one, so I'm going to continue using it.
All right. Okay, moving on to industrial relations.
On samurai.
All right, so the Australian Retailers Association has made a submission to the Fair Work Commission to be exempt from certain penalty rates and overtime allowances. So what they've said instead is that those kind of perks, and that also includes like rostering arrangements and that kind of thing, they've said that there should be an overall trade-off where you give up all those rights and you're given a 25% pay rise. Now, that on the surface might sound appealing, but the problem is, remember this, it's a one-off 25% pay rise. There's nothing there about like, you know, that pay rise or that level continuing like year after year or every 3 years or whatever. It's just, we'll give you that one-off pay rise now and we'll take all your other entitlements forever. That's the way those things work, usually, anyway. Now, the Australian government, our Murray Watt is our workplace relations minister now. He actually said that if this is taken on board by the Fair Work Commission, that the federal government will intervene and make it null and void, which apparently they do have the right to do, or at least the workplace relations minister does have the power to do that. So this is part of the general pitch to blue-collar workers. But here, you know, we're talking particularly retail and hospitality. And as we know, people who work in retail and hospitality really do get screwed over. And vast majority of them do not have a union to put their case for them. They're very much on their own. So, yeah, I've got to say, yeah, probably I'd say good on him. I don't like what he's doing with the CFMU and a host of other things, but this is probably a good move by Murray Watt. The business lobby, of course, will not like it. The coalition won't like it. But would this actually be something that could gain Labor votes? Yes, it is. I would say, generally speaking, these are the kind of things that people support. They don't like cuts to entitlements at all. That's, you know, part of the reason why even a lot of coalition voters opposed work choices back in the day. Even Tony Abbott, fun fact for you, in the cabinet room, he was the only minister to oppose work choices. The problem is, though, there's not enough discussion generally about wages when it comes to entitlements, penalty rates, overtime, things like that. People are just more generally talking about the overall cost of living. And, you know, it's not just wages there, it's just, you know, prices of everything and interest rates. So I don't know if that'll really cut through. Okay, now the business lobby is also putting a lot of money behind advertising against the Albanese's industrial relations policies. We mentioned last week that even the WA government, Labor government, is somewhat uncomfortable with the current raft of IR reforms because it's encouraging unionisation in Western Australia's gold mines, or mines generally, I should say.
Yeah.
And big business obviously very much agrees with this. They don't like the fact that all of a sudden they've got to negotiate contracts with unions. Previously, a lot of these companies basically just didn't have to do that. Now they do. So yeah, they're going to be putting a lot of money. Haven't seen any ads yet. Then again, I've got an ad blocker and everything, and I don't read the newspaper.
No, I haven't. Okay, the only novel ad that I've seen so far was for a monkeypox vaccine thing.
Really?
I had to fucking stop and stare at this shit, man. I was just like, okay, all right.
Oh my god. Yeah, I mean, look, prepare for the ones from Palmer though. They're gonna absolutely ratchet up. It's going to be a lot like 2019, I think, where there was just a saturation of Palmer ads. But yeah, the Business Council of Australia and the Australian Minerals Council, they're the ones most pissed off by a lot of this. Now, Murray Watt, like I said, the IR minister, he said that big business has been benefiting from 10 years of coalition wage suppression. Yeah, look, I would say I would agree with that, but unfortunately, it's wage suppression under Labor as well. Okay. Stagnant wages in this country is very much a bipartisan effort. All right, it's both sides of politics.
Stagnant wages in this country is the effort.
Yeah. All right, now there is going to be legal action brought against John Setka, who of course was the former secretary of the Victorian branch of the CFMEU. So this is being brought by the Fair Work Ombudsman. Now, why is this? This is because of the efforts of John Setka and the Victorian CFMEU to have Stephen McBurney sacked from the AFL. Do we remember this story? So Stephen McBurney is currently like the head umpire of the AFL. I found this title confusing at the time because it's not actually an umpire. Yeah, like he's not. He doesn't work as an umpire. He doesn't go out and umpire a game. It's a behind the desk job. I don't know. An AFL fan would have to fill me in on what exactly that is. But anyway, it is like fairly
umpiring, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know, something like that. Anyway, it's a pretty plum position. High pay. Well, basically, the CFMEU said that they were going to go on strike unless this guy was sacked. Now, why was that? Well, because he was actually the head of the ABCC, the Australian Building and Construction Commission. They were basically a watchdog of the CFMEU. As the name suggests, they were officially a watchdog of the building industry, but really, in effect, all they did was target the CFMEU. And so McBurney actually made 50 court actions against the CFMEU during his tenure. So that was between 2018 and 2023. Now, it is a breach of industrial law to basically threaten someone or threaten someone's job with industrial action. You can't do that. And I remember thinking that at the time. I thought this, okay, if they wanted to launch some kind of campaign against this guy, and you can understand why would you go and make it public? And this was where Setka really fucked up, I think, was that he loudly and proudly proclaimed that they were basically going to halt construction of the AFL stadium in Hobart. because remember that's in preparation for the new Hobart team, Tasmanian Devils, I think they're going to be called. Setka and the CFMEU basically said, we will stop that site. Like nothing will happen until this guy gets sacked.
Oh, God.
So, yeah. So, unfortunately, I've got to say, John Setka, I think this case is going to be successful against you because, yes, it is a crime to do that. And because you were so public with it, it's easy to make the case that you did so.
You know, maybe one day we'll see John Setka get torn apart limb from limb, like one of the scenes from 28 Days Later. Because we nearly saw that, didn't we?
We nearly saw that over the COVID stuff. We did nearly see, yeah. That was classic back then.
I was legitimately enjoying myself. I was still being the cynical prick that I am, but I was actually having a good time.
Yeah, look, he obviously cucked on that, but like overall, you can't call Setka a cuck in terms of representing his members. All right, there was that one thing, but like he was like one of the most militant leaders that they've ever had in Victoria and in Australia. You know what I mean? And he was a real construction worker too. He wasn't a guy who just like studied bloody public relations in uni or something and then went to work for a union. He was an actual blue collar guy. He was very hands on. And when it came to like those threats that were dealt out to people, he would personally deliver them. He wouldn't let other people do his dirty work. He was happy to get his own hands dirty. All right. So pretty much every week we have something on the state of Sydney's rail workers. New South Wales government has actually now been successful in suspending industrial action. So the Fair Work Commission has declared a cooling off period until July the 1st. In other words, any industrial action that would be taken on Sydney's railways would be illegal. This was something that the New South Wales government has actually been pushing for months now, but finally they've gotten their way. Now, apparently, now that like this cooling off period has been put into effect, the union, which is the New South Wales Rail, Tram and Bus Union, they've said that they're now definitely willing to sit down with the government. It's just not clear if the Minns government is willing to sit down with them. They were just more concerned about stopping this industrial action through the regulator rather than through wage negotiations, which is obviously what the union wants. But I'm sure we'll have a lot of updates on that to come. All right. Last story on industrial relations. So the Deputy Premier in Queensland, Jared, Blajige, it's Blejije. I really don't know how to pronounce that. I'm sorry.
Who the fuck let the Polish spell his last name?
He's written a letter to the federal IR Minister, Murray Watt. This is opposing the federal plan for a harmonised approach to national labour hire regulations. So in other words, that means, every state and territory has the same laws. That's what's meant for harmonising laws. Now, he opposes this because Victoria has been chosen as the host jurisdiction responsible for the passage of that harmonised law model. Now, that would basically mean that the labour hire regulations that they have on the books in Victoria would more or less be followed by every other state and territory in the country. So he said, I can confirm that the Queensland government does not support harmonisation of the labour hire licensing scheme at this stage, particularly having Victoria as the host jurisdiction. He then went and singled out Victoria's building industry and the behaviour of the CFMEU as identifying a rotten culture within Victoria. Well, the problem with that argument is the CFMEU is under administration. It's been taken over by the government. So that argument really doesn't hold up anymore. Now, the LNP government, just like any other coalition government, is obviously very anti-union. And that usually means that they're very much in favour of these labour hire mobs that are able to circumvent statutory protections for employees. It's very convenient to get people an ABN and just have them as an independent contractor, because then guess what? You don't have to pay them sick pay, holiday pay. There's a whole bunch of other things where you can take your employer to court for. All of a sudden, all those statutory protections that you would have enjoyed as an employee, they're gone.
Because you're a sole contractor.
Yeah, and look, this is the coalition likes it that way. They'd like you to be a rugged individualist and be an entrepreneur. Just because you've got a bloody ABN, you're effectively still a wage earner, just without all the legal protections that usually accompany it. I mean, all that happens is you go in, you clock in with the same amount of hours or more to the same employer doing the same work, and the only difference is that you just invoice them the bill, rather than be directly paid wages every week or every second week. That's it. Okay. Aboriginal news.
It's a shame you don't have that soundboard anymore.
Yeah, I know. Well, I never used it on the Races War anyway, but yeah, it would be nice to use it now. Here's a policy that I don't know. There's a lot. You got to put a lot of nuance into this when analysing. So anyway, the Country Liberal Party, still fairly new in the Northern Territory. They've had a raft of reforms, most of which actually that I've been supportive of, concerning crime and stuff. But they're set to actually water down laws that and these operate at the state and territory level across the country, I might add, where it says that where possible, Indigenous children in child protection should be placed, and here we're talking about foster care, placed with Indigenous families under the Aboriginal child placement principle. So in other words, an Indigenous family is given priority over a non-Indigenous family that is offering foster care. Now, the conservative side of politics has been very much against this, or at least wanted to water it down for a while. If you watch Sky News, they do talk about this every now and then. And the basis for that opposition is very simple. There are a hell of a lot of white families there who would do a better job at raising those children than some of these Aboriginal foster families. And I don't doubt that for a second. Okay. Obviously, generally.
I was going to make a joke, but I've now realized I legally can't make a joke because of an implication about this entire subject. God damn it.
Well, I'm glad you're mindful of that. It means I don't have to go back and edit anything. So that's good. But look, what would the white nationalist take be on this? Well, it's different from the bleeding heart take, and it's also different from the conservative take. I definitely understand that prioritizing Indigenous families means that often you're actually just putting them right back into abusive families all over again. Obviously, I understand that, and that's a flaw in that policy. However, conservatives are saying the answer to that is white people should be raising Aboriginal kids. To that, I say, fuck no. They're not ours. And how many of those foster families would already, say, have kids of their own, like, say, 2 white kids? Then they go and adopt 2 Aboriginal kids and prepare for those 2 white kids to be absolutely put through hell by their violent, crime-prone, low-agency, low-IQ stepbrother or sister. And, there's already a lot of these stories in America.
You are my sister.
I remember one. I can't remember names or anything now, but I do remember there was a white girl who was raped by her stepbrother because he was African. He was adopted.
Oh, dude, there's hundreds of those. There's thousands of those cases a year in America. That's not like a one-off, a polarity, or like a theme. That is a seasonal fucking event in America.
Yeah. And this kid was like adopted from Ethiopia or something. He was an orphan, and of course he was adopted by Christ cuck parents who already had a daughter, and then she ended up getting raped. And yes, absolutely, that's just one story of many. Another blended family is that Amy Coney Barrett. You know her? She was appointed to the High Court or the Supreme Court. Yeah, the Supreme Court in America by Trump. And she was considered to be the extreme right-wing appointee under the extreme right administration of Donald Trump. And then you go and have a look at her family. 2 of the kids are adopted from Haiti.
Yeah. Again, even on the main show of one of the networks we post this to, Mike Pinovich made a point that like those kids are ticking time bombs for raping the actual the bio child or raping another white girl at the school, because that's just what fucking happens.
Right. So the CLP in the Northern Territory is considering watering down those laws, essentially meaning that you would have more Aboriginal children adopted to white families. Now, would those Aboriginal kids get a better standard of parental care? Yes. Do I care? No. Because I don't want them raping white children. Or just fucking terrorizing them, generally. And the fact that so many conservatives are brainwashed like this is just amazing. They think it's like a noble thing to do, to basically terrorize your own children. So I just say no to both of these. Leave Aborigines to their own devices. As I've said many times before, let's give them their own piece of land and just let them be. We take away the drugs and the alcohol and the smokes and everything, and they're only allowed to use opal fuel. And also, we certainly don't give them any money. All right, they've got to fund everything themselves. And if they can't, I don't care. But that is the real solution to all of this. Because you see, both sides, the Bleeding Hearts and the Conservatives, both operate under the assumption that it is just a matter of policy. If you just get the government policy right, Aborigines can be brought to the same levels of whites, and that just isn't true. And you see, this is the problem in denying race when you operate under these falsehoods, is you'll never actually react to these problems in the correct way.
Oh, God.
All right. Oh, so just I found this story interesting. I just read this earlier today. Last week, of course, we covered the case of Tony Maddox. He's a guy who has farm property in Tujay, which is in regional Western Australia.
Please tell me we're good news.
Well, hard to say.
No.
First of all, I just wanted to add a detail that we missed last week. I mentioned that he was given a $2,000 fine and was forced to pay $5,000 in costs, so $7,000 altogether. What I just found out, though, was his own court costs. he was battling this in court for 2 years, and he spent over $100,000 on it. So really, he's actually $107,000 worse off as a result of this. Now, what I found interesting, though, was not that. That's actually just, unfortunately, not surprising. What is interesting is that he was actually saying that you remember the revised laws that were actually put into place briefly last year? I'm sure we all do. We definitely covered them.
How fucking horrific they were still.
Yeah, basically, they were going to go further. Fines would have been bigger, regulations would have been more onerous, and there would have been a bigger process to jump through all the legal hurdles, etc. But he was actually saying with this particular incident, and this is where he basically just built a walkway over a creek. A lot of people refer to it as a bridge, but that, I think, was a little misleading. It was just a pathway over some water. He actually said that under the new laws, that he would have been better off. So he said here, what I have done at my property would have been a tier 1 activity, that is under the new laws, and therefore exempt under the Cook Labor government's new act. He said the new act was far less nasty than the old act. However, the new act scared the daylights out of everyone. Now, look, I would have to sit down and read the nitty-gritty of this, but apparently the Western Australian Liberal Party agrees. And so they're now saying that they would move an amendment under the current legislation. So this is the Aboriginal Heritage Act of 1972. They're saying that now they'll move an amendment that would, basically make what Tony Maddox did legal. And then the Labor government, and also the former Labor Treasurer, Ben Wyatt, who is a quadroon Aboriginal, so far as I know he is anyway, he has said, well, the Liberal Party is now reviewing an act to introduce the reforms that she demanded be repealed. No, it's not that simple, because she demanded that the legislation as a whole, that is the 2024 legislation as a whole, be repealed. Now what she's doing is actually just moving an amendment, one amendment under the current act, that would do something that the new laws would have done. So that's not exactly capitulation, or reversing your position. So I guess the main reason to point out this story is that there are ways we can reform the current act to remove ridiculous clauses in it that make it illegal for you to build a small walkway on your own property. In this case, it was because he disturbed the rainbow serpent, which is like a spirit that apparently Noongar people believe in their version of the
Great Swan River, Big Mad. Big Mad Great Swan River. Sleep on property which is financially viable for fines.
Yeah. Now, man, if you were to ask the vast majority of Aborigines in Western Australia if they've heard of the Noongar rainbow serpent, they won't have a fucking clue. They won't have a clue.
Majority of them would pull their dicks out.
More white people would have heard of it, I think.
Oh, fuck yeah.
White people like us who read these stories. Aborigines don't read these stories. Okay. Let's move on to crime. Of course, we're going to go straight to the Northern Territory. A Northern Territory Chief Justice has commented on the increase in incarceration in the Northern Territory. Now, I'm not sure what it is for juvenile detention, but ever since the CLP was voted into office in the Northern Territory, the adult corrections population has actually increased by 20%. That's a lot. It's still not a big population because the population in Northern Territory as a whole is not very big.
No, yeah.
However, in terms of the strain it has on infrastructure and staff and everything, is pretty noticeable. Now, this Chief Justice, Michael Grant, he's saying that there's actually a very clear reason for this rapid rise in incarceration. And that is that the CLP has implemented a zero tolerance approach to crime since they were elected. Like I said before, most of the recent reforms from the CLP, I think, are actually pretty good. So, when it comes to crime that, say, under Labor, you used to be able to get away with a warning or maybe just a fine or something. Cops are now going that extra step where they're arresting more people and charging more people to the point where, more of them are ending up in remand and in prison. Now, this Chief Justice, as you can imagine, is a bleeding heart lefty. For one thing, as a Chief Justice, you're not supposed to comment on this. This is political commentary. You're not supposed to do that, but he's doing it. And he's saying that at the moment, there's nothing really that the courts can do to alleviate the problem because they're just getting so many people sent to them on charges. Notice he's not saying they're like spurious charges or anything. The charges are legit. He can't say that.
Yes.
The cops are actually arresting and charging these people with good reason. The only difference is that previously they weren't. Because, what the politicians say does have a big bearing. Police exercise a fair amount of discretion when it comes to arrests. And basically, Northern Territory police believe that this current Northern Territory government actually has their back, or at least more so than the previous Labor government.
Just wait.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's the other thing. The CLP government is newly minted. This very often happens. Like you could actually say a similar kind of thing is happening with the LNP in Queensland, because a lot of stuff they've been doing, not really on crime, but on like climate change and Aboriginal affairs. I think what they've been doing is good. But it's early days. A lot of the time they just kind of knock that stuff out really quickly, and then they go right back to, just being Labor light in the run up to the next election. So yeah, obviously we've got to give it time to make a fairer assessment of what the CLP is doing. But right now, if you're specifically talking about crime, I think they're doing a good job. Now, there is obviously
the clarify what I meant by that statement. I say, I mean that if there was something even closely similar to a Kumanjai Walker event, this government
would be the real test.
Yeah. I would put money on it folding like a fucking house of cards.
Yeah, because as far as I know, the CLP, when they were in opposition, didn't really get behind Zachary Rolfe, and they bloody well should have. But, I guess they just considered it to be too politically risky or whatever. I don't think it would have. I think it would have actually proved very popular, especially given that everyone in the Northern Territory, no matter where you live, has had interaction with Aboriginal people. Okay? Just like if you're from Perth, all right? Even people in gated communities in Perth have had experience with Aboriginal people. And given that, they would be very likely to support Zachary Rolfe in discharging his police duties, and therefore the CLP getting behind him. Wouldn't have any doubt about that. Now, obviously, one byproduct of this is, like I said, it creates a strain on existing infrastructure and staff. And the Northern Territory prison officers have just passed a no confidence vote in the Northern Territory's Corrections Commissioner. Now, the reason for that is because of him approving of plans to hire private and interstate guards to work as prison officers in the correctional facilities in the Northern Territory. Now, look, this, by the way, this was 87% of the union's membership voted in it, and it was a 98% no confidence vote. So, that's damning, to say the least. But look, as I said last week, I just don't know how else they're going to do this. I mean, obviously, give them better wages. You do that, and also you give them retention bonuses. Last week we covered that they're basically scrapping that for police officers in the Northern Territory. So that's one in law and order policy that they've failed on. But yeah, that's it. Unless you pay them better, you're going to have to be forced to look into state and to the private sector, just like they've had to do for police in the Northern Territory for a long time. I remind people, Zachary Rolfe is not from the Northern Territory. He's from Melbourne. All right?
Yes.
But they had to lure people over there because of the severe shortage of cops. All right, quick story here. Bruce Lehrmann, the guy who is accused of raping Brittany Higgins, he is going to face court in Hobart over apparently stealing a car.
All right.
So it was... Apparently he stole a car from Mountain River in Tasmania, which is about 30 kilometres from the Hobart CBD. Okay. I don't really know what else to say about this other than that is really, really bizarre. He apparently stole a Toyota Prado. Now, I don't know...
Good pick.
Why? As a guy who has a high profile and, should want to do everything he possibly can to keep a clean nose, why you would go out and do something as brazen as actually just carjack a car. That is really, really bizarre. So, I don't know. Let's wait and see if there's anything more to that story. All right. WA election. The campaign has officially started. The major parties had their campaign launches. And the leaders, that is Libby Metham of the Liberals and Roger Cook of Labor, they were somewhat overshadowed by other figures of their party. So all attention seemed to be on Basil Zemplis, who gave a speech at the Liberal campaign launch, and all attention seemed to be on Mark McGowan at the Labor campaign launch. So these are two people who, one not running for office, one not in Parliament yet they both have, this kind of celebrity status that their leaders simply don't have. So that was interesting. You might say, will Roger Cook have a problem with name recognition? Well, not if the Liberals have the same problem. And there's a hell of a lot of people out there who don't know who Libby Metham is. And as I pointed out before, officially she's not even the real opposition leader. That's Shane Love of the National Party.
Oh, boy.
Now, actually really only had one other story on the WA election, although we do have another story on the WA Libs in a bit. People may not know this if you're not from WA, and even a lot of people in WA don't know this. There is no formal alliance between the Liberal Party and the National Party in Western Australia. Something unusual. They still always go into coalition with each other in government because, that's the only way they'd be able to form a majority. But because they don't have a formal alliance like what they do at the national level, that means that they run candidates against each other. So there's a lot of talk about Labor maybe losing the seat of Fremantle, and they would be losing that probably to the Greens. Fremantle has become extremely like hipster gentrified. It used to be like a bit of a hippie place, like for boomer hippies to retire.
Oh god, it is. There's a lot of heritage buildings out in the quieter parts of Fremantle where you wouldn't have to deal with the mega Aboriginal homeless encampments they get around where Notre Dame is. But I remember going down there towards the end of last year, and I remember seeing Palestinian flags. Well, your stock standard ones, your gay Palestinian flags.
Yeah. It's hard to believe Freo used to be like the place where wharfies lived, because of the docks.
Yes.
Very working class. It was like the home, or still is actually the home of the office of the MUA, Maritime Workers. But obviously changed a hell of a lot. It's more like a bloody FIFO site now, where people don't literally fly in, fly out, but everyone who works on the Freo wharfs does not live in Freo. Not anymore.
They put a university there. They put humanitarian courses in that university, and then they put up brew pubs on the coast.
Yeah. So anyway, what I was getting at here is
then they put a dick up their own ass.
In the seat of Fremantle, the Liberals and the Nationals are running in the same seat. Now, I mean, one of the things about having a formal coalition with another party is that you agree you run in certain seats and they run in certain seats. You never run in the same seat because you're collaborators. You shouldn't be competing against each other. And that's generally the way it goes. Which is why, I've noticed lately, I've never seen so many campaign posters and advertising for the National Party. Because, I'm a guy who lives in the suburbs. Basically, all I ever see is Liberal, Labor, and Greens, and maybe stuff from other, minor parties and independents. I never see stuff for the Nationals. But now I'm seeing it because the Nationals are actually running in a lot of suburban seats, including Fremantle. And they reckon with the Liberals and the Nationals going at each other and the way they're preferencing in the seat of Fremantle, that they've basically saved that seat now for Labor, and it is not under threat from the Greens. It's also just going to be really interesting to see how the Nationals do and how much they say divide the vote in all of these other seats that the Liberals are looking to take back from Labor after they were catastrophically destroyed in the 2021 election. Okay, to the federal election. Very quick story on this. This was somewhat surprising, and this found that when it comes to political advertising on TikTok, the coalition is actually better and outperforming Labor. Now, the coalition is often accused of kind of, being behind the times or not appealing enough to young people. And I mean, back in 2007, when Kevin Rudd was running, Labor were the first party to really strongly use social media in an election campaign. Now, obviously, everyone uses it because social media is just so pervasive. Yep. But Labor were always sort of seen ahead of the curve in that regard, as being a bit more tech savvy. But TikTok, which is said to be more of a Gen Z and Gen Alpha platform, I guess, seems to be dominated by Peter Dutton.
It tends. Okay, it just tends to. TikTok tends to be generally more racist because the fucking algorithm doesn't ban it. Not to say that Peter Dutton's a racist.
But do you think that has something to do with it?
Well, I mean, being at least in his forward-facing announcements and statements, yeah, it would fucking help.
Okay. Fair enough, yeah. But that was the only reason I found that interesting. I was like, that award always goes to like Labor or the Greens or the Teals or something. Very rarely do we
Not
credit
anymore.
the coalition, with with being gurus on social media. Okay, right. Some people would have seen we definitely posted about this on social media, but the WA Liberal Party, they have claimed the scalp of one of their own. So this was a guy who was going to run as a Liberal Party candidate in the seat of Kimberley, which is obviously in the regional areas of Western Australia. So this is a guy, small business owner, I believe. Yeah, he's a publican. He referred to break-ins, like car break-ins, burglaries, etc., as welcome to country. I thought that was a great piece of wordsmithery. He actually, when these remarks were first brought to light, he refused to apologise for them. He doubled down. That made me think, what a legend. I wish I lived in Kimberley and could vote for the guy. And amazingly, even Libby Madam, the Liberal leader, supported him. He said, like, these are poor choice of words, and he shouldn't have used them, should apologise and all that shit. But he's still going to be the Liberal candidate for Kimberley. Okay, well, unfortunately, some more comments were unearthed. Oh, sorry, his name is Darren Spackman. So, here was another interview that he did where he said, and this was to do with Aboriginal crime, he said, "I have changed my attitude, but 10 years ago, I would have said, hang the cunts. If you commit the crime, bang, that's it, you're done." Now, I've seen the other side of it where I've been to juvenile justice. You've only been to school for 3 months of your whole life, and you come to town and you're couch surfing. How long until you steal food? He's obviously talking about remote Aboriginal children and, their general career trajectory. So after those comments and saying, hang the cunts, to be fair, though, he said, I would have said hang the cunts. He's saying he doesn't support that anymore in regard to Aboriginal offenders. But that was enough for Libby Madam. She demanded his resignation and she got it. And I don't know, they're getting a new candidate for the Kimberley. Sucks. So anyone who says that, we can take over the Liberal Party or the National Party or something, no, you can't. You cannot do it. Look how quickly they moved on this guy.
Oh God! Okay. Like he lit a fuse up his behind his ass.
All right, so we might remember the previous Deputy Premier of Queensland, Jackie Trad. She served under Anastasia Palaszczuk, of course. She seemed to have a bit of an issue with the Crime and Corruption Commission, always up her ass over various things. So there is now a report that's just been tabled in Parliament, and this actually dates back to 2021. This found that Jackie Trad engaged in aggressive advocacy for the appointment of a top bureaucrat in 2019. So I'll spare you the details of this, but this was basically a plum position to a government department for a friend of hers who got the job, I believe, in the end. Now, she had been fighting for a suppression order of this report. So that's why it has taken nearly 4 years for it to actually come to light. Now, Jackie Trad said that this report being released is political. I don't think so. If this was released just before the last Queensland election, okay, then I might say, the timing of it would at least suggest it might be political. But to do it only a few months after, the LNP is elected and still during their honeymoon period? No, I don't think so. And Anastasia Palaszczuk was warned by Queensland's corruption watch job, so the Crime and Corruption Commission, that her top public servant may have engaged in corrupt conduct, and she would consider and should consider sacking him. That was something else that was revealed by that report. Okay, just quickly with the federal Greens, in the Victorian electorate of Wannon, they've got to find a new candidate because the current candidate, Lauren Green, how about that? Her name was actually Green. She's been found to be a dual citizen. And there you go. That's the federal seat. And yeah, if you're a dual citizen in a federal seat, you cannot run. Not according to, I think it's Section 52 of the Constitution. Something like that. Okay, now let's. This was.
Now we've got new politicians, and I want someone to cause another fucking round of like, oopsie daisy, I'm accidentally a citizen of the UK. Oopsie daisy, I'm accidentally a citizen of New Zealand. Oopsie daisy. I want there to be another cascade of that bullshit happening again.
That started with the Greens as well. Funnily enough, it was Scott Ludlam, who I think was a citizen of New Zealand.
Yeah.
It was. Whenever it happened, it was always like either New Zealand or the UK. I remember. So yeah, something Thomas Sewell would have to take into account, being a Kiwi, if he really wants to plan ahead. That is.
I saw a post shitting on Thomas Sewell today from some fucking e-girls. And it wasn't shitting on it because it's the most autistic thing fucking possible, which I completely believe he would do.
Oh, okay.
Which is like, repeatedly ask, how many white babies do you have?
Oh, man. Well, he's got one.
Right.
Okay, so Paul Murray from Sky News said that this was like the biggest political news story of the week. I don't know if I agree, but anyway, Clive Palmer will be back in action this election. No, it will not be under the United Australia Party because they went all the way to the High Court with that one. And no, he can't re-register it in this election cycle, considering he deregistered it in the same election cycle. So that's a breach of electoral laws. He can't do it. So what he's done instead is announced his own party, a new party of his own, newly registered, called Trumpet of Patriots. Now, as the name would suggest, it is a Trumpian party. He has said very directly that the policies of Donald Trump will be the policies of the Trumpet of Patriots. Now, this is certainly not the first time Clive Palmer has at least flirted with Trumpian imagery. If we remember back in 2019, that was the last time you had saturation political advertising by Clive Palmer. It was just everywhere. Even someone like me who manages to block out most advertising, there were still billboards all over fucking Perth that I had to look at when driving around.
Oh, God.
Of the United States.
I was working in this one industrial park during that period of time, and I couldn't fucking turn a corner without seeing a fucking billboard.
Altogether, when it comes to advertising, marketing, fielding candidates, etc., they reckon that Palmer spent $80 million on that campaign.
Wow.
And you know how many seats he got out of that in the House of Reps and the Senate? 0. A lot of people, though, say, well, look, okay, fair enough, but he might be the reason why Bill Shorten didn't become Prime Minister. Because if you look at the advertising that Palmer was doing back then, it tended to just focus on Labor being bad rather than promoting his own party.
I think our take at the time was that he basically was just a torpedoed candidate, not like a real candidate.
Yeah. Now, I mean, obviously debatable as to whether or not $80 million was worth that. He seems to think it is. But anyway, in that election, I don't know if people remember, he was using a lot of memes. I'm not going to say the person's name, but he actually had on the payroll, like doing memes and ads and cartoons and shit for him, a guy who was like, who like somewhat infiltrated the white nationalist scene in Australia generally, like multiple states. He's known in Combat 18, for example. I know a lot of people are going, oh, yeah, I know who you're talking about. Most of you probably won't. I had one interaction with him where he basically tried to rip me off. I won't, but like I said, I won't name names here. But Palmer was actually like getting into and working with elements of what you could basically call the Australian alt-right back in 2019. And he was releasing these really cringy, like, platformer video games and stuff. However, he didn't really mirror the Trumpian platform. You know, there was no equivalent of, like, building a wall or something, you know. This time around, that's what he's trying to do. He's actually just trying to copy Donald Trump's policies. For example, he wants, like, a government Department of Efficiency, you know, a Doge. He wants tariffs. He wants to push back on a lot of the woke stuff, like the transgender movement, that kind of thing. I don't know how well that's going to work for him, because Peter Dutton seems to be doing a lot of that stuff, you know, not on trade, not on tariffs, but certainly, you know, the woke agenda he's trying to push back on. And, you know, Dutton generally says very nice things about Trump, whereas previous Liberal Party leaders, including John Howard, did not have nice things to say about Trump. It's a bit different this time. Now, the other story about Palmer here was that it turned out after he realized he wasn't going to be able to re-register the UAP, he actually engaged in, he engaged in talks with Pauline Hanson, where it was effectively he was going to take over One Nation. Now, he offered them, this is what I remember reported on Sky News, as $10 million for party funds, and also $500,000 to finance her appeal against the defamation victory of Maureen Faruqi. Remember, she won her defamation action against Pauline Hanson. I forget how much she was ordered to pay in damages. It was a lot, probably, you know, six figures, I'd imagine. But Pauline is appealing that, and still appealing it without Clive Palmer's help. But anyway, a little bit of war of words emerged in the media between Palmer and Pauline Hanson over this. Palmer said that Pauline Hanson was insistent on being president for life, meaning that she would have to have all control over the party, as well as be the party's leader. Pauline Hanson is basically saying it's the opposite of that. And I mean, you know, Pauline Hanson definitely puts her name to it. It is called Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party. But like, Palmer is just, it's all just about Palmer when it comes to his movement, no matter what iteration it is, whether it's the Palmer United Party, United Australia Party, or the Trumpet of Patriots. If you looked at all those memes back in 2019, it was all him. If you look at the platform of video game, it was a very generously proportioned depiction of Clive Palmer jumping up and down, collecting coins and stuff. So a bit hypocritical of him. And look, just last thing I'd say, remember that when you finally saw the platform of the UAP and the Palmer United Party, remember, it was always just Liberal Party light. It was basically Liberal Party economic policies with more generosity for refugees and migrants. In other words, pretty much what the Australian Democrats is. You know, they were basically a Liberal light party that ended up drifting further and further to the left, because that's what happens when you if you don't definitively have like a right of centre party, whether it's economic or dissident or whatever, it will eventually drift left. And I mean, someone like Jackie Trad, sorry, not Jackie Trad, just talking about her. What's the name of the, oh man, why am I forgetting her name? Of the Palmer United woman from Tasmania.
Oh, fuck.
Let me just pause it. Jackie Lambie. Forgive me for forgetting her name. But
Bipolar politics woman.
Yeah, she was part of the Palmer United Party, like of the first 4 senators who were elected. A lot of people have kind of forgotten that now. But, she ended up going independent and drifting to the left. She's a mixed bag. If you look at her policies on industrial relations, she's not quite to the left. But generally speaking, she did. And so did the others who drifted away from Palmer's party. So, look, don't be fooled by this guy. He's a guy who'd rather piss up money on election than actually pay his workers properly. Just Google that stuff about Clive Palmer. If you look at the, for example, the redundancy payments that he still has not paid some of his workers who've worked on his mines before. He's just a guy with an enormous ego. And, the power that business gives you and how much money it affords you is not enough for him. He wants the political power to go along with that as well. And no one like that should be rewarded. All right. So, just quickly on health. So Labor has promised that by the end of the decade, by 2030, that 9 out of 10 GP visits will be free or bulk billed, as they say, charged to Medicare. So this is a $8.5 billion program that will be rolled out over 4 years. It's said to be their centerpiece health policy. It's all about strengthening Medicare, and they're saying that it's the biggest boost to Medicare since its inception about 40 years ago. And it did not take long for the coalition to then match it dollar for dollar. They had, some differences here and there. For example, they said that they're going to have a greater emphasis on mental health. So $500 million will be announced for mental health support. Don't worry, Labor will probably match that as well. This is one of those areas where there is bipartisanship. We mentioned last week that Labor always run what's called a Medi-Scare campaign. It's bullshit. No. When it comes to health funding, the coalition are pretty much in line with Labor. That certainly does not mean we have like a universal healthcare system in Australia. We don't. It's very much a mixed bag. A lot of it, yeah, okay, maybe free, but a lot of it we got to pay for as well. But yeah, the idea that Labor supports like total universal free healthcare, no way. No, they don't. This isn't Sweden or something.
No. Even Sweden, Oh boy.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know they have enormous waiting lists and stuff in Sweden. It's still not a utopian system. Yeah, I know. All right, a few quick stories to end the episode. Just quickly in the public sector, the Victorian government, they've had to acknowledge their enormous debt. Net debt is set to reach $187.3 billion by mid-2028. That would make it the largest net debt in the country. However, it's not the largest per capita net debt. That prize, of course, goes to the Northern Territory, and I'm sure listeners will be able to figure out why. But anyway, if you can believe this, the public sector union, the CPSU in Victoria, is accusing Jacinta Allen of mimicking Elon Musk's Doge, Department of Government Efficiency. The reason why is because she's taken into account an independent review that basically says the public sector is too big. And she's also announced another one. Okay, governments do this all the time. They always announce independent reviews of spending. That's called doing basic accountancy, isn't it? And this also goes to what I was saying before about Department of Government Efficiency. Why do you need one when we already have reviews into government spending? All departments have those reviews themselves. And why you would need another layer of bureaucracy to reduce bureaucracy seems absolutely counterproductive to me.
Yeah.
So, no, I think that attack by the public sector union is incorrect. They're simply just acknowledging that even by Labor standards, this is an enormous public debt, and they do need to rein in the public sector. Now, that goes for public infrastructure as well. So there was a report also just released from the Victoria's Auditor General. And by the way, that basically is like Doge, the Auditor General. It's their job to keep an eye on the finances and everything. They said that there have been cost blowouts of $11.66 billion in the past year alone. That's enormous when you consider that like the overall cost blowout of Snowy Hydro is $10 billion. Victoria has managed to beat that by $1 billion in 1 year. Anyway, they also said that there is a complete lack of transparency when it comes to the allocation of that money. Again, that doesn't surprise me.
No, not particularly.
All right. On national security, so ASIO have said, and I think this was like Mike Burgess did an interview with media recently. He said that they have foiled a number of plots by hostile foreign nations to assassinate or harm critics in Australia. Now, I would love to know how many of them are
Chinese.
Yeah.
Fucking China. I know they freaked out earlier because they thought that some
and
Russian.
India too.
Oh,
India
no, definitely fucking
Palestine.
India. Yeah. Oh, fuck yeah.
You know, the Sikh separatists. They're definitely going after them.
Yeah, I forgot about
the only case I could maybe imagine where this might be happening with a white country would be Russia.
Yeah,
And
they
even
freaked out about that earlier.
Yeah.
There was a big freak out mid to late, like 2023, 2022, about that.
Yeah. But, you know, unfortunately, this is not the kind of data that ASIO makes available. All they've said is that, yes, there have been a lot, and they have foiled a lot of those plots. We really don't know the details of it. Now, something else he said is that anti-Semitic attacks in Australia have not yet plateaued. So in other words, there is intelligence to suggest that more is on the way. So, you know, he's lending credence to the idea that we need tougher hate speech laws in this country, even if that's not actually what he supports. I don't know if it is or not. Okay, so on abortion, there's currently an overhaul of New South Wales abortion laws, and it would make it compulsory for most of the state's hospitals to offer abortion services. So usually, under current laws, pretty much every hospital has to at least provide referral pathways to women who are seeking a termination. But under these laws, those hospitals would actually have to perform that termination as well. And I think there are just some, you know, very few exemptions here of like Catholic hospitals, for example, you know, of which there are some. So they're not going quite to the level of what they did in the ACT. I don't know if people remember the story of where, like, the ACT's only Catholic-run hospital was basically nationalised, taken over by the ACT government. And there was one reason why they did it. They refused to perform abortions.
Yep.
So the homosexual chief minister of the ACT said, okay, we'll just nationalise you. We'll just take it over, and then we'll make abortions accessible from that hospital. I'm not exaggerating. That's what happened. All right, and finally, Albo has decided to get married at the end of the year.
Oh, he's making it official.
It's official. Now, we don't know exactly what time, but it'll be the second half of 2025, and it will be a small, intimate ceremony. So apparently media is not welcome there. So, close family and friends only, I imagine. Isn't that heartwarming? Cool. Well, there we go. Oh, geez, nearly 3 hours for you guys. Hope you enjoyed that. Episode 238. Remember, all our stuff is at the race.biz. And yeah, have a good one. We'll see you next week.